Hey everybody, this is Steve Krause. I'm coming at you shortly after finishing commenting on everybody's ancient style and YouTube projects. It took me a while because of work stuff that has nothing to do with this class. Sorry about that, but that's these things happen. Just a couple of quick things about the ancient style process and also about style part one. First off, I thought the ancient style peer review process, peer assessment process, went much better than the first time around. And I think it has mostly to do with practice, having done this previously. Um, from my own point of view as a teacher, I like the peer assessment process quite a bit because it allows me to be in a space where I'm entering into a discussion with you about, and you being all of you, about what all of you about what constitutes good work on these projects. It's not just a situation where you individually there are writing to just me a paper, but rather you're writing to a larger audience, and that's part of the whole point of writing at an advanced level is that you're trying to learn how to write for a wider audience, and that's something that for those of you who are going to go out and teach writing that you'll learn a lot more about. So I really like the idea of how the peer assessment process really reinforces that concept, and when the peer assessment has gone well, basically I almost completely agree with students' assessment. Not 100%, and I'm probably a harder grader in general than most students are, but for the most part, the kinds of assessment that students are giving is similar to the kind of assessment I would give. I think that the assessment process is in and of itself a pedagogical benefit. I think that you learn something more about your own writing and your own thoughts about what it means to write well by looking at other people's writing and making comments on it. Um, and I think it gives people an opportunity to sort of have a broader audience and a broader chance to partake in the process. So I'm kind of sold conceptually on the idea of peer assessment. There are some logistic issues with it though that I've talked about before. The burden of getting these assessments together is really problematic. And I'll spare you the details, but let's just say it's a lot easier for me to just simply collect essays, grade them, and pass them back in terms of using my time and things like that. The other problem with them is that if there's some kind of issue where somebody hands in something late or they don't do something correct or something like that, the whole thing can kind of collapse on itself because if one person doesn't do one thing, it has kind of a domino effect. So in terms of the process, that's sort of the way that I see it. As far as like how people did in the ancient style and YouTube project goes, for the most part, I thought the essays were pretty good. I think there's a couple of general things to contemplate. One is that even if you include a link to the video, and you shouldn't, of course, include a link to the video, it's useful to have enough of an explanation in the video about the commercial itself so that a reader doesn't have to go back and watch the commercial to understand the essay. So in other words, the link should supplement the essay. It shouldn't necessarily be a requirement for the essay. The second thing is, and I mentioned this when I set the assignment up before, is that you don't necessarily want to have a laundry list of stylistic elements and say, here's my essay. So in other words, it's like a lot of the essays are kind of like, and there's onomatopoeia, and there's a metaphor, and there's a hyperbole, and there's an oxymoron, and there's a paradox, and the idea is to focus in on some stylistic elements, explain what they mean. I'll get to that in a second, and try to make some sort of point with them. In other words, what is the role of repetition in this particular commercial? Why is that important? That sort of thing. The next thing is that always remember, never forget that the purpose of this assignment, and really most of these assignments in this class, is for you to demonstrate mastery of the assigned reading and that you've thought about it in relationship to your own writing. In other words, I got the feeling from some of these essays that people had not necessarily spent as much time with the ancient style readings as they probably should have, and I think that hurt some people on their essays. So, especially if you spent way too much writing about the commercial. But again, generally speaking, I thought that they were pretty well done and potentially a good source for something to revise. Now that's my next topic here is talking about revision, and I want to talk about this in two ways. Let me talk about it first in terms of style part one. You could revise either the first project, the Invention and Technology project, or this project as part of style part one. which project you choose will depend a little bit on which one you feel most comfortable revising, but it also should depend on which one you think you can revise in relationship to Strunk and White or Williams. What I mean is that if the problem with either one of these essays, or the thing that you want to revise in either one of these essays, has more to do with, say, not explaining your invention or technology example, or not explaining your commercial or something like that, then you might not want to revise that essay. If instead the idea of a revision is you think that through learning more about, say, what Williams has to say about sentence structure, clarity, and what potentially it has to, what Strunk and White has to say about being clear, or what Williams has to say about coherence between paragraphs and topic strings and that sort of thing. If you think that those kinds of readings and that advice can help one of your essays, then you should pick that essay. What I'm getting at is that for style part 1, it's not simply a matter of making your essay better in general. Rather, it's also an issue of taking the advice from Strunk and White and Williams and applying it to one of your 2 essays to demonstrate that you've actually learned something from these books, that this advice was useful, and you've made changes as a result of that. Hopefully that makes some sense. I think that the most effective versions of Style Part 1 literally quote and paraphrase, from the bad examples and the good examples. So for example, let's say that you found the advice from Williams on clarity to be very helpful. The idea of sentences should have, the subject of a sentence should be a character, the verb should be the action that character takes, that you should have all this information in the first few words of a sentence, all that kind of stuff like that. So what you would do in your essay, if you decided that that is an important rule for you to revise your essay, what you would do in Style Part 1, the explanation of it is you would explain the rule that you're working with from Williams. Then you would have some bad examples from your previous essay, some sentences that you thought were problematic, and then how you change those sentences in relationship to the Williams essay. So in other words, Style Part 1, you literally want to include examples of the changes that you made. Hopefully that makes some sense. Now let me talk briefly about the other part of revision, and that is you can revise all of the essays for the class. These first 2, the ones that we're working on now and the one that we'll work on after this, having to do with the collaborative movie project, by the end of the term to improve the grade. So in other words, all the grades for these major writing projects are in flux if you decide to revise them. There's only a few things to keep in mind. The first thing is, and so this is different from Style Part 1. Style Part 1 requires you to revise one of these first 2 projects. What I'm speaking of now is a revision that you could do for the course by the end of the term for any of these other projects, including the one that you revised for Style Part 1. There's only a couple of basic rules. First rule is that if you want to revise something, you have to physically come speak to me about it, or we have to set up a time to talk via Skype. In other words, you can't just do it and not tell me about it. And you need to come speak with me about it and have some version of a plan. In other words, this is what I'm going to do to revise this. And whatever questions that you might have about my comments and other people's comments. The second thing is that you can only revise an essay once. In other words, you can't make a change, show it to me, say, what do you think, and then make another change. Along those lines, all revisions are due by the end of time, which is, for our class, April 15th this term. We'll get to that later on. And the last piece of advice on it is that you want to revise stuff strategically. What I mean by this is that in theory you can revise everything in the course to improve your grade, except for situations where you have chunks of grade deducted because stuff was late. But the question that you have to ask yourself is, how much is it worth it to spend that sort of time and all this other kind of stuff? And the other thing is that you have to think about is revising strategically in terms of where it will make a difference. In other words, if you have an essay if you have a bunch of B's on an essay and one of them is a C, you need to revise the C essay even if that wasn't one that you were particularly happy about. If you're between a B plus and an A minus, it'll probably make more sense for you to revise than if you're right in the middle of a B. If everything that you've got in the class is an 85% B, then revision might not help you out much. But this is all stuff that we can talk about when we meet in person to talk about different revision strategies for this. Okay, I hope that helps. Like I said, read the stuff below. Be sure to vote below on your process, what you want to do for the, the next peer review thing. And as always, I'll see you online.